hello, and welcome to the latest episode of The Invisible Men. IQ, great to see you.
Great to see you, Ian. We've got another young lion on the show. I
Yeah,
couldn't be more excited.
we have an amazing guest, Gianno Caldwell, who's a television host, political analyst on Fox News, a consultant, author, speaker. He's just written a very powerful and personal book called The Day That My Brother Was Murdered, June 24th, 2022. We're going to get into this. Gianno, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for your contributions to that book.
Oh, no, absolutely. Well, before we get into the book, before we get into the Gianno Caldwell, who's doing such incredible work and using this tragedy to help the lives of hopefully millions of young people across the country, just tell us a little bit about yourself. And if there was a moment when you were growing up that you realized that race was a thing, that somehow skin color meant something to you or other people or how they treated you.
Well, very good. Well, thank you again for having me. And I got to tell you, my story stems back to Chicago. I was born and raised on the south side of Chicago to a mom who was addicted to drugs. We lived in a projects. Grandmother rescued us. She was a private duty nurse at the time. Until one day she leaves the garage, drunk driver hits her car, injures her back. She can no longer work. And then we had to rely on welfare again. She loses her house to foreclosure. We're on all kinds of government assistance programs. I learned from my grandfather, who was my first ever mentor, who would take me to work with him when I was 7, 8 years old, 9 years old, pay me $10 a day to do things like hold the flashlight and hand tools. I learned from him after one day driving through the south side of Chicago in his red pickup truck in an area of Chicago called Inglewood, which is one of the hardest hit areas in terms of the drugs and violence. And me seeing someone who looked badly beaten by drugs, I thought it was my mother. I began to tear up. I looked to my right so my grandfather wouldn't see me because he's a strong alpha male from the South. And he did catch wind of it. And as he caught wind of it, we were riding by and I noticed that wasn't my mother, but it certainly could have been her. And he
Mm.
says to me, "What's wrong with you, boy?" And I say, "This lady, what can I do to prevent this kind of thing from happening?" And he begins to tell me about the elected officials and the power they have to increase the penalty of law for those who sell and distribute drugs and how they can provide grant funding for those who want to be rehabilitated. So at 14 years old, I began to work as a volunteer for my local alderman every day after school like it was a job. And that led me to a role with the federal government part-time at 16. And from there, I bought a multi-unit apartment building without any family assistance, help, or knowledge at 19. And from there, I became a lobbyist. I left the federal government, started working for a local government agency as their director of government relations. And the story goes on to DC, to Mitt Romney, to start my own firm, to my television career, to the Caldwell Institute for Public Safety, and many, many other things.
Wow. So your life has been a journey. There's so much that we can get into, and I know we don't have a lot of time. Um, well,
I gave the concise version.
yes, I'm sure. And in many ways, all that work that you did, the tragedies that you saw, the efforts that you put in your early life to change this trajectory for many other young people ultimately clashed with what happened in your own personal life. And I'd love for you to tell us a little bit again about your book, The Day My Brother Was Murdered, June 24th, 2022, Christian Beeman. I'll have to say, by the way, I noticed that President Trump promoted your book on his platform, Truth Social. He says,
Yes.
quote, "It is a tragic story, and yet one in which so much can be learned about violent crime in America, and most importantly, how to stop it."
Hmm.
Those are powerful words from the President of the United States. Tell us a little bit about what occurred to your 18-year-old brother, and then what the new journey that has put you on.
Okay, I'm gonna tell you, I got to answer your second question too. When did I know I was black? When did race become a factor, etc.? And then I'll jump into my brother story. Well, I learned about race largely from my grandfather, who grew up in the Jim Crow South. and small business owner, plumbing construction, like I mentioned. He gave a lot of lessons on life. I additionally learned from other men in the community. I remember this one time when I was at the grocery store. I was a little kid. I was with my mom, and this older gentleman said, "Take care of your mother. You're black. You may not understand it now, but you'll understand when you get older." And
Wow.
I got what he meant by that.
Wow.
Moving beyond that illustration, Christian, my baby brother Christian, who was murdered on June 24th, 2022 on the south side of Chicago, who was innocent, not the target. He was a kid that loved life. He begged me to take him to UCLA for a college tour at 16, which we did go. He was preparing for his future beyond Chicago, and I was excited about his future. He loved playing basketball, sports. He was pretty good at it. He played with the older kids because he was that good. He loved to joke around like many of my family do, and he didn't deserve what happened to him. The day my brother was murdered, My Journey Through America's Violent Crime Crisis, the book, stems from that very day. It was 150 people murdered across the country. I talk about people like James from Philadelphia, who was an Army veteran, who could not sleep at night oftentimes because he had PTSD. So he would go to this park near his house almost every night. And on June 24th, he went to this park at 2 a.m., like he normally would. And there was a group of kids there, some 10, 11, teenage. And he said to them, "What are you all doing in this park? You need to go home." And they then took a traffic cone and beat him to death.
Oh God.
Or people like Catherine, who was a wife, a mother, grandmother from Texas, 64-year-old chemical engineer. She was going home on the highway one day when June 24th, when gunfire took place. A drug deal had went bad. The guy who was selling the drugs was trying to rip off the guy who was buying the drugs and vice versa. They were trying to rip each other off. When they discovered it, they jumped in their cars and they began shooting on the highway. And Catherine became a casualty of that night. Or baby Cecilia, who was in the car with her parents and her brother, who was 3 years old. She was 5 months old, 4 days from her 6 month birthday. They heard fireworks. They thought they heard fireworks. And the brother in the car, he says his sister's bleeding.
Mm.
She was shot. These are the set of circumstances in which many Americans are dealing with across the country. People who have these very tragic stories, and we already know how bad it is. So I wanted to get into some of the solutions. So I talked solutions with you, Ian.
Yep.
And I think you gave me some really strong nuggets that people need to dig into. I talked to people like John Walsh from America's Most Wanted, Dr. Drew Pinsky about mental health and the contributions to the violence in America, people like Sean Hannity, my pastor, Dr. Bill Winston, and many, many others about what's going on in our country and how to stop it. That is what the book, the day my brother was murdered, My Journey Through America's Violent Crime Crisis is all about.
Yeah, remarkable, remarkable. Just a couple of points. There's so much here. I just want to make one observation. The thing that is truly remarkable about you is some might look at you from a 10,000-foot level and say, oh, he's a caricature of a black conservative. He's taking advantage of a situation, has become famous. But yet your depth, your commitment to solutions, your practical focus on this issue, it's really exceptional. One question: is your grandpa still alive?
He's very much still alive.
So he has seen the
Oh,
seeds that he planted in you. What kind of conversations do you all have about the journey you're on?
Well, first, I want to respond to the 10,000 foot view comment, which someone, when this initially happened with my brother, someone said, "Oh, you're trying to be famous." Well, I've been on Fox News for 7 years. I've already been famous. So that's not new for me. And that's part of the reason why I got all of this exposure. My grandfather, someone who I very regularly thank because his impact on my life is something that cannot be erased. My first ever mentor in life, someone who I look up to today, and someone who I cannot thank enough for planting those seeds. And as you know, I have a girlfriend, I'm not married. or anything like that, and I don't have any children, but certainly if and when God bless me with those seeds, I will do exactly what he did. Just like when I would be with him during the summers, and he would say, you're going to have to pay room and board, which was pretty expensive for me. I had to pay $10 out of my paycheck, which would be $50 for that week. And I would say, Granddad, you have all this money. Why are you taking money from me? And he said, you may not understand now that I'm teaching you personal responsibility, but you'll understand when you get older. And
Wow.
certainly that was a lesson that I cannot thank him enough for.
We need to have you and your grandfather come back. No, seriously, I'm not kidding. To come back
Yeah.
on the Invisible Men. Seriously.
Yeah.
Because I think that's the kind of wisdom, you had the benefit of hearing, and so many young men and young women are not hearing
Yes.
about the choices you make, the values you need to live with. I mean, all the terrible examples you just gave of people being attacked, murdered. What makes it worse is that in many of these cases, they're never resolved.
Correct.
Is it
Correct.
is it the case that there's still no one in custody for your brother's murder?
It is the case that no one's been charged for his murder. There was an individual that the police discovered in a mall right outside of Chicago who was making some type of fuss, if you will. They arrested him and they found the murder weapon on him. But the question, I think, what we don't know is, did he buy the gun? Did he trade the gun? Was he one of the shooters? And the detectives told me that they believe there was a high likelihood that he was one of the shooters. Because the story going back to that day, black SUV pulls up, 3 to 4 black men with dreads get out. They begin firing into a crowd. My brother was not the target. He was standing next to the guy that they wanted. The theory around the case that I discussed with the detectives, there was a fight that took place 6 months prior. Two
Mm.
guys fighting. One guy got beat up very badly. And then another guy recorded the fight and put it on Facebook. The guy who got beat up very badly obviously was embarrassed. He tries to murder the guy that posts the video. He runs to Los Angeles for safety for whatever reason. I mean, they're trying to murder him. Days later, when he gets back in town, 6 months later, thinking the coast is clear, he's standing next to my brother, and multiple people are shot, including the girl that was standing there. So that is what I've learned about it thus far. I haven't heard anything much different than that. This individual, from what I understand, is being prosecuted by the federal government. He was wanted for multiple things. I've had multiple conversations with the FBI about this. He's likely going to get life, but they cannot charge him with a homicide,
I
and
understand.
that's the real issue. So, if anything, the Chicago police can't really prosecute him or attempt to get a case on him until the federal case is done.
Understood. Gianno, have you looked into this no snitch culture? Where did this come from? When did it kind of start? Is there a birth movement around this issue? I mean, I think about the amount of violence that's triggered from this no snitch culture. It's so painful.
Yeah, it quite so. And I grew up in Chicago where the no snitch rule was absolutely in place. The distinction is during that time, the violence was against people who were actually in the life. If an innocent person got shot, kid, grandmother, whatever the case it is, the neighborhood would find out who did it. They would either turn them into the police or they would deal with them on their own. In this case, and they would say, hey, don't tell. That was the thing because you knew harm would come to your family, but it was something that would normally, you would get some form of justice. And I don't consider street justice any justice at all,
Yep.
to be honest with you. But in this case, you can snitch, not shit, snitch, still be shot, grandmother be shot, kid, brother, like it's just, it's the wild, wild west is ultimately what it is. It's become Gotham City and many of these cities, not just where I'm from in Chicago. There's issues in New York, as you all know.
Of course.
There's issues in Los Angeles. There's issues all around the country where progressive and liberal people run those areas. It's not about law and order. It's not about safety and security. What went from a noble discussion about criminal justice reform has turned into justice for the criminal. And it is unfortunate that our people, black people, continue to pay the price for this nonsense.
I mean, your brother's story, this tragedy, innocent bystander, is actually very reminiscent of the story of Hadiah Pendleton, who was another teenager who was killed several years ago in Chicago. And I wanted to say a quote that President Obama said in the aftermath of that tragedy. He said, "There is no law or set of laws that can prevent every senseless act of violence in this country. When a child opens fire on another child, there's a hole in that child's heart that government can't fill. Only community and parents and teachers and clergy can fill that hole." Throughout your book, you talk about the power of faith. Now, as we pivot to solutions, because we definitely, let's talk about policy. But first, I just want to talk to you about culture and faith and morality and how much we should be leaning on that incredible force to help more young people avoid these kinds of tragedies in the future.
And you know, you said something very interesting to me when we discussed the book. You were saying that the students in your school, if they have, or just generally anywhere, but if they have the central focus of faith, that's gonna, what was the percentage that you gave? That they alleviate from crime, a life of crime?
Oh, it's significant. I don't remember the exact number, but there's no question that young people who have a personal faith commitment in their life dramatically lower levels of interaction with criminology and any of the incident types of incidents that we're talking about here.
And that's a major factor. But we also know fatherless homes. There's a 20% or 20% more likelihood that they're going to get involved in violent crime in fatherless homes. 20 times more. And that's from studies that have been out there. There's some other studies out there that gives different numbers, but we know that that certainly has an impact. If you don't have a male mentor in your life, you can have a female mentor. That's good. There's nothing wrong with that. But young men need men in their life. They need direction in their life. And it's up to the three of us and much more to be that example in these children's lives if they need it. It's just not enough in our community to just raise your own kids well. That's good, and it's what we should be doing. It's the foundation. But we also need to be volunteering our efforts and our times to do some of the things that you all are doing. This podcast, I think, is an important vertical for those kind of conversations. What you're doing with your charter school is extraordinarily important and really good. So it's a touch point that changes the lives of children. I tell you, I'm going to speak this month at the end of the month at a Georgia school district, which is ran currently by my eighth grade teacher.
Hmm.
He called me up the other day and he said, "Hey, I'm in this new role. I've been thinking about you. I know you got a new book out, etc. And I would like for you to come and speak to all of our staff. And I think it's going to be 400, almost 500 people in the room, and then it's going to be streamed to about 15,000 district staff. A
Brilliant.
30-minute speech that I'm going to give." And he wants me to touch on the power and impact of educators. And
Yes.
I think that is extraordinarily important. But to him, particularly in my life, I'll never forget it. We had an election for student body president. I ran, and so many other kids ran too. And I'll never forget because I went up and I said, "You know what? I'm coming up here and I'm gonna tell you not what everyone else has said. I'm gonna say, vote for the person that you think is going to do the best job, who has your best interest in heart, who understands the issues." And that's me. Like, ultimately, that's me. And I'll never forget what he said before the voting even took place. He said, "You know what? I'm gonna take my weighted vote and I'm just gonna make Gianno the school. I'm gonna make him the president, the student body president." But it's that kind of encouragement, that kind of insight, that kind of thoughtfulness around children and what they bring to the table to make them feel seen is
Yep.
extraordinarily important. And especially when you're coming from these homes that aren't really homes at all, extraordinary poverty, violence, no father in the home, drug use. And I'm talking about things that I personally experienced. To be seen by my grandfather on the weekends when I would see him, to be seen by my teacher, Dr. Horton, as he's known now, to be seen by many of these other individuals who made it a point to tell me something positive about myself, to tell me that I can do it despite what the circumstances said, was invaluable. I am not a statistic, but
Yep.
there's many others that are not statistics as well. They just don't know it yet.
Gianno, you referenced these progressive, I think, mayors in our major cities, and I look at Chicago, and I remember Mayor Lightfoot, and I said, well, it can't get any worse than that, and it did. And now I look at New York, and I know you've had some commentary on that gentleman that won the
Yes.
Democratic primary.
Socialist. So yeah, democratic socialist.
What's going on? I mean, I literally didn't think it could get worse than Lightfoot, and it absolutely did.
Yeah.
When are we going to get fed up with this?
Yeah, Brandon Johnson, the lowest polled mayor in Chicago history, it did get worse. They have policies in place in Chicago called the no chase policy, which was pushed by Lori Lightfoot, continued by Brandon, which police, in order to pursue a suspect on foot or in car, they have to call their supervisor and get permission. By that time, the suspect has already escaped. He's gone.
What's the rationale for that?
It was around Laquan McDonald.
Oh my gosh. I mean,
That
another,
that that was that was the rationale for it.
another tragedy, but a stupid.
Response to it.
Exactly.
A very stupid response. It's asinine. That's what it is. It's asinine. So we have him. Then we got this Democratic socialist who says, "I want to defund New York City's police department. I want to eliminate jails." And those are just the safety and security issues. They've already defunded the New York Police Department by $1 billion after George Floyd. What is that? What did that do? It led to death and destruction. They want to do it again. I guess one time wasn't the charm. This guy is a disaster. He wants to tax so many people, and if you think about it, since 2021, I think up to 2023, I think those were the numbers. We saw about 14, 15 billion dollars in tax revenue leave New York City and
Mm,
come to Florida.
mm.
So this guy is going to ultimately end up being the best realtor for the state of Florida because there's going to be so many people that are going to leave. People have been taxed enough already.
Exactly.
Not only that, you misuse and abuse the funds that you had. People like Mayor Adams with the migrants. I thought that was a disaster, even though I'll give him credit for speaking up and then thereby being targeted by the Biden administration for speaking up, my personal belief. But, enough is enough.
Enough
We
is
as a community must speak up and say enough is enough. And in places like Chicago, it's a bit more dire than it is maybe in New York City. But anytime you got black bodies littered in the streets, I call it a state of emergency.
I mean, we're recording this on July 2nd, 2025, right? Just a couple days before the July 4th weekend. Last year, there were more than 100 people shot in Chicago over the July 4th weekend, and I know there's fear that there'll be no abatement. Okay, let's really get into solution. How do we change this outcome? That a year from now, 10 years from now, we're not saying these things. What's the lever? What's the most important lever we have?
Well, the most important lever is always voting, putting in the right people in office. But in the event that you don't have an election coming up, then citizens getting involved with their legislators, going and letting their voices be heard is critically important. The thing about it is, in places like Illinois and in Chicago, where people have been so brainwashed by folks on the left that sometimes they think the policies they're offering are good because they wrap them in a form of anti-racist justice, if you will. They'll call things like the Safety Act, which eliminate cash bail for the state of Illinois, is a good thing. The Safety Act also for people who are on these house arrest with these ankle monitor bracelets, which we've all seen the ankle monitor bracelets. Well, in Cook County, which encompasses Chicago, they allow people who have been accused of murder to have these ankle monitor braces. And during the time when I was growing up, if you had these on and you left your house, leaving to go, on your front porch and onto the sidewalk, these ankle monitor braces, they would go off or alert the police. They're calling your house. They're stopping by your house. Well, with the Safety Act, Police are not allowed, get this word, allowed to go to this person's house who has his ankle monitor bracelet, who's out of range for 72 hours.
Wow.
So just imagine you're accused of murder. Let's say you did it. Now you got a 3-day availability to go out and murder the witness to your crime. How foolish is that? But that's the
Incredibly.
state of affairs in places like Illinois.
Incredible. Well, in the spirit of time, I guess I know time is tight and you are a busy man. I want to move to our speed round. I'm going to offer up a couple of names of individuals, ask you to pick one, and tell our audience why. We'll start with Malcolm or Martin.
Man, that's a good question. And I got to tell you, I think there's, I have to pick two. One, Martin, I appreciate his nonviolent approach. I appreciate his brotherly, we bringing it all together, all races. We're fighting for civil rights. It's the humane and right thing to do. I appreciate all of that. Malcolm X, though, he was a much different, he had a much different approach. Maybe I didn't agree with the approach completely, but he was an educator. He often talked about the damage that white liberals were doing to our community
Yes.
under the guise of, oh, this is going to be helpful. No, it isn't. And he was one of the very few that was willing to speak out against them. And that might be part of the reason why his life ended so tragically.
Excellent. And we'll do just one more, which is a tricky one. Joe Rogan or Tucker Carlson?
Man, that is that is a tough one. Wow. I know Tucker Carlson personally. I have his cell number. Known him for years. Uh, Joe Rogan, I think, offers something very different. He can bring in people like Tucker Carlson to talk about the real intellectual issues, but he can also talk about things that has absolutely nothing to do with politics, absolutely nothing to do with business. It's just about life. It could be about feeling good. He covers a range of issues, so I'm gonna have to say Joe Rogan.
Very good. I'm going to end it there, Ian, just in the spirit of time.
Yeah, well, Gianna, we end the show asking our guests to give advice to a 16-year-old black kid, uh, who lives in forgotten USA. His name is Daryl. Not 16 years, not much younger, than your actual brother. And I just want to read you a quote from Pastor Price, who you quote in your book, who talks about the impact of the decline of religious faith. And he says Americans aren't just leaving houses of worship, they're leaving deity altogether.
Hmm.
They don't just leave the church, they leave God. And then I become my own God so I can make up my own truth. I found that a really powerful quote. And as you think about advice that you would give to a Daryl, to a young man who may not be seeing the kind of mentors that you're talking about, what advice would you give to that 16-year-old who's trying to make their way into the world?
Never give up. Don't listen to the naysayers, and nothing and no one can stop you but yourself.
Is that what you heard from your grandfather?
That's what my pastor, Dr. Bill Winston, says all the time. Nothing and no one can stop you but you. And it is absolutely correct. More often than not, I think when we go to these schools and we're young, a lot of the teachers that I dealt with during that era, they would give you excuses as to why you cannot be successful. They will remind you of the set of circumstances that you come from in a form of empathy, but it actually was a
Mm.
dereliction of their duty.
Yep.
You're supposed to build students up as a teacher,
Yep.
even though it was a nice thing to do. And maybe they were a white liberal and they're like, man, I'm sorry that you're going through this. It's so terrible. But they would give kids the excuse to act out. They would give kids the excuse not to be educated. They would give kids the excuse not to be their very, very best.
Yep.
And that is not what we need. We need people to say, you know what? It doesn't matter how bad it is. It doesn't matter if you were born across the tracks or on the tracks. There's nothing and no one that can stop you but yourself.
Gianno, that's amazing. And let me just ask one then final question, because some people will hear that and say, Oh, that sounds like he's saying just pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. That's not what you're saying, is it?
No, I mean, some people don't have boots, but with God, He'll give you some.
Mm. Gianno Caldwell, uh, thank you for everything you've done in your life, but using this tragedy to change and improve outcomes for young people across the country of all races. Thank you for everything that you do.
Well, thank you for having me, and I encourage people to go to caldwellinstitute.org. I encourage people to go to caldwellinstitute.org and support our efforts with the Caldwell Institute for Public Safety, which is what I set up after my brother was murdered, to tackle some of these political issues and certainly advocate for stronger laws forming around public safety. And please follow me on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, TikTok at Gianno Caldwell, Gianno Caldwell, Caldwell. And thank you so much for what you guys do. I can't tell you how important it is to have your leadership. You all have blazed the trail for me. And you certainly are pillars in our community, people that we look up to and say, wow, these guys went to Harvard and look what they're looking to do in their community to give back. So thank you so much for that.
All right. Well, with that, thank our listeners for another episode of The Invisible Men. Gianno, I look forward to seeing you again with your grandfather
Yes.
uh, on a special episode.
Absolutely, we'll do. Thank you so much, Ian. Thank you so much, Ian.
Thank
All
you.
right.